At the beginning of the final story arc in Sonic Adventure 2, we are finally given access to lost footage and excerpts from the diary of the revered genius, Professor Gerald Robotnik, in his final days. This is the first time across nearly 10 hours and 3 campaigns we're seeing his actual POV. After all this talk surrounding his mystique, his demise, various images of the professor locked in chains are suddenly casted everywhere aboard the space colony Ark, a facility where years of research and scientific advancement was conducted. The Ark was also the birthplace of the ultimate lifeform, one Shadow the Hedgehog. Despite reservations towards the United Federation government financing his projects and using his inventions and discoveries for their more nefarious purposes, Gerald intended for his great scientific triumphs to make a more positive impact on the world, specifically for his ailing granddaughter Maria, also aboard the Ark, who had an incurable autoimmune disease. For that, Robotnik would do anything, even encroaching on his own beliefs and ethics, if it meant that she could live. The Federation's primary goal with Project Shadow was to obtain immortality. While in space, Robotnik struggled with actually unlocking that key to immortality, surprisingly. This would lead to his future deals with Black Doom, this dapper alien over here, exchanging his otherworldly blood for access to the final product in 50 years' time. The Eclipse Cannon, a massive laser centered in the middle of the Ark, was a contingency plan then made by Gerald to ward off any potential future alien threats, and reluctantly also satisfied the United Federation, who were becoming antsy due to the lack of perceived progress. Meanwhile, the UF felt that alien lifeforms being in the mix made the whole project a little dicey. Which, to be fair, I don't really know how else you expect to get immortality if you're not going to make at least a few deals with the devil, but fine. To halt any progress made towards a project becoming a liability, GUN, the Federation's military forces, decided to wipe their hands clean of their involvement altogether and sabotage the entire facility. Every scientist aboard the Ark was to die, all samples and data to be archived and stored away from prying eyes. This was to even be facilitated by manufacturing consent through the media, with fake leaks about inoperable conditions aboard the colony. And the plan went off without a hitch, leaving everyone but Gerald to be the last one standing amidst so much carnage. Now incarcerated on Prison Island, Robotnik was forced to continue his work on Project Shadow under the watchful eye of GUN. This incident was of course only referred to as a tragic accident in the media, assuring that GUN would be successful at covering their tracks for 50 years. With the news of Maria being caught in the crossfire, hell, deliberately murdered by the same entity locking him up and throwing away the key, it's not surprising to see how dark things became. The professor went into extreme shock and grief, harboring a deep hatred for the same world he wanted to make a better place. Subsequently, a long and complicated scheme to destroy the planet was hatched by the now mad scientists. The space colony Ark would now be beguiled in the eradication of humanity by crashing into the Earth below in the not-so-distant future. Now that Eggman, Robotnik's grandson, unwittingly activated the Doomsday Protocol, that plan was finally coming to fruition. A manifesto of sorts was broadcast throughout the Ark in front of the game's central cast, providing a glimpse into how a shattered mind of a man can also become a mind on a mission to commit global genocide. All the hurt, anger, and regret are on full display in his words and in those pages, even showcasing how terrified he was of the man he was becoming towards the end of his life. The last we see of him is actually just before he's set to be executed, firing squad style, by the same government he gave his life for. If a part of any other series, this climax would be decidedly morbid. Considering there are anthropomorphic animals with blocky ass gloves and cool ass shoes walking around though, the tonal shift isn't too insane, but it's definitely like, ooh, damn. Speaking of those animals, Robotnik admitted to being able to carry out his master plan through changing Shadow's memories about what happened aboard the Ark. He would be the vehicle to exact revenge. The entire game, you're led to believe he's doing all this as a solid to Eggman. Even in the midst of being mere minutes away from crashing into the Earth, that's a lot of M's. I just realized I put in the script. He's at the most peace we've ever seen him throughout the entire game. Complete acceptance. A small chat with another hedgehog, Amy Rose, is enough to trigger his latent, true memories of his final conversation with Maria. She sacrificed her life in order for him to keep living and urged Shadow to do what he could to make the world happy. In direct contrast to her grandfather, Maria doesn't condemn the world in her last moments, despite having every reason to harbor resentment. She was the first to recognize the humanity within the hedgehog and treat him as an equal, capable of making the right decisions even amidst tragedy. Probably, definitely, most likely my favorite scene in the whole game. Amy, who is sidelined for the majority of it, mind you, gets to be the one who reminds Shadow of the light of empathy. Shadow, now reeling from recognizing his own humanity again and the error of his ways, rushes to help everyone else and make one last effort to make things right. I ate this up as a kid playing SA2 for the first time. The game is a case study on the cyclical nature of violence, the role that the state can play in its own demise, and how to make a pet simulator the most rewarding part of the entire experience. The adventure series marked a shift towards a more serious tone in the storytelling of the Sonic video game franchise. A vibe that has only recently, for the most part, been restored after years of what can be described as utter woke nonsense. Nah, but seriously, a lot of these stories, even with their many shortcomings, came across to kid me like cinematic epics. So I'm glad now that kids these days, just as green and impressionable as the kid version of me back then, have a shiny new movie to adapt this really important story. We're really 3 movies in now, man. Video game movies. Y'all are on something. You know what I mean? Like, video game media in general is just kind of on a run that has never really happened before. Now they're actually a worthwhile endeavor for a lot of these companies to make. We're expecting a 4th Sonic movie soon. That was announced like the day the 3rd one was coming out. They've really reached an equilibrium between like doing their own thing in the storylines to make them like sensible to general audiences, while also just having all types of sources across this 30-plus-year-old Sonic brand. And it just ends up giving audiences like a family-friendly Hollywood take on the Blue Blur. It's cool. It's great. But it was one character that they had to get right more than anyone else. But now that I've actually sat down, seen the movie, I can finally start the yap session. Shadow in Sonic 3 is characterized pretty well, being for the most part a mirror to his SA2 counterpart. He's blunt and moody, he has an immense amount of potential. Both versions throw Sonic for a loop and match up to be his equal. All of this on top of introducing new powers, adding to the overall lore of the universe. Both Shadows are hell-bent on doing to this world what they did to him, and he looks fucking awesome the whole time. Seriously, they hold nothing back. They give him the motorcycle and the gun from his title game, and like as soon as I seen that, I said, "Oh, we in for a classic. We in for a classic, low key." I think where Sonic 3 is most interesting for series veterans like myself is how they use specific differences to fit the universe that they're telling the story in. Placing the research facility on Earth, for instance, grounds the narrative, figuratively and literally. Another example, adapting Maria this time around with much more time than what was provided in Adventure 2 to showcase her relationship with Shadow. Of course, now in 2024, damn near 2025, we have the context of future works like Shadow 05 and Shadow Generations, so we can tell that Maria is a ride or die and pretty much his sister, but back in 2001, it's like she dies, and it's tragic, but almost for the sake of it being tragic, and not because she ever really had much of a personality shown beyond caring about Shadow. Here, she's seen actually goofing off and being a relatively normal kid. The bond she forms with Shadow is explicit in how she's the first to humanize him. She's essentially what every kid watching this movie would probably be like if they got to be friends with Shadow. And you don't even gotta do much to portray that. A good montage goes a long way. Presently, when she eventually dies at the hands of the government, let's be real, albeit through slightly different means. That impact hits so much harder for audiences who are getting to know Shadow for the first time. Though this time, Maria's movie counterpart isn't suffering from an incurable disease. Her diagnosis with an autoimmune disease in the games provides higher motivations for Robotnik and, I assume, all the other scientists at the space colony to begin with. I'd still argue the tragedy from the depiction of her death in the games, even despite not really knowing her that well, hits just really hard because we know that she's already living on borrowed time due to her illness. I at least would argue that if we didn't have the perspective of a very much alive still Professor Gerald Robotnik to tell us how he really feels. Easily the largest marketed difference between the new movie and the game universe is Gerald being alive and well all throughout the events during this story. Structurally, all the pieces are there. Ordinary genius scientist hired to work on Project Shadow turned vengeful mad scientist after the death of Maria, sent to Prison Island, largely blamed for things falling apart, yada yada yada. But now instead of a firing squad, he's just been alive somehow for like the last 50 years, bro. He's just been stewing in all that anger and hatred for so much longer, while also being a more kind of active participant through like current events throughout the story. 110 years old and still wanting to commit global genocide is nuts. But it does give us the opportunity to have two different Jim Carreys on the screen at the same time. So that may or may not, charge at your sensibilities. I didn't mind it too much. I mean, both Robotniks being able to interact in real time is cool though, I gotta say that. The events of SA2 begin with Eggman breaking into Prison Island with the knowledge that his grandfather did all this cool stuff before he was born. He goes there because all his research is there and he gets Shadow out of his cryogenic sleep chamber. In turn, Shadow swears fealty to Eggman, promising to help him take over the world, all while still operating under Gerald's original mind control orders. In contrast to the games, Gerald seeks out Eggman and serves as his OG in the movie, leading audiences to just spend more time with the true antagonist of the story. He preys on movie Eggman's desire to connect with another person and uses that to complete the Doomsday plans. And of course, there is a few montages to boot here. Considering he's hilariously still alive, looking past that, it feels like this Gerald low-key has even more of a reason to throw everything away. The film doesn't excuse him of using the only people left that give a damn about him as a convenient means to facilitate mass murder, but I guess seeing the game's events go down the way it did always kind of gave Robotnik a much more eerie vibe. Like, the state felt like they had to kill him in order to keep all this weird Shadow business under wraps. Maybe that doesn't do well on the big screen, I don't know, but I think there's something lost in that kind of spooky nature. At least now, we can picture how different things can end up with his vengeful input like literally live in his grandson's ear now rather than just kind of fables and stories Eggman has heard throughout his childhood.
Who taught you to hate yourself from the top of your head to the soles of your feet? Who taught you to hate your own kind? Who taught you to hate the race that you belong to? So much so that you don't want to be around each other.
It's just like when you got some coffee that's too black, which means it's too strong. What you do, you integrate it with cream.
One thing of note, of which I totally understand why it didn't get more shine in a 2-hour-long kids movie, Gunn gets off extremely fucking easy. Even as a kid, I felt it was always made apparent that much of the events that happened in the story were largely caused by extreme carelessness by the hands of the United Federation. Any more war crimes, and they might actually get pushback at the Sonic equivalent of the United Nations. Seriously, in the games, it's not until Shadow stops another world-threatening event, that alien business I mentioned earlier, to where the government actually admits to maybe jumping the gun with the whole covering up conspiracies and killing everyone involved and leaving no trace and forcing our guinea pig to keep developing weapons of mass destruction thing. They get low-key even more grace in the movies though. Sonic and company don't even fully trust them by the end of the first act after getting bits and pieces of what went down 50 years ago. However, there is really no dialogue being held about anything restorative that they've done in their culpability for everything. Gerald is kept alive by nothing but Shadow's chaos energy and pure unadulterated hate. You'd think that they'd have dude in a nicer cell or something at least. I guess by contrast, you could also have firing squads and literally locking up Sonic the Hedgehog in jail because they can't tell the difference between him and a black hedgehog. They even put Sonic in Gerald's old self, for crying out loud. Shout out to Amy for breaking them out though, my abolitionist queen. I could spend the rest of the video just rattling off differences and similarities, but I think I'll just settle here on the dialogue. A dialogue on the weight carried by Shadow being the ultimate life form. Shadow for the last 20 plus years has been kind of coming to terms with his purpose and identity in the games. Is he truly a weapon of mass destruction? What happens when others take away his agency for their own reasons? After Maria, and because writing around Sonic stories hasn't always been so tightly bound, Shadow spends a lot of time retreading old ground and rediscovering himself. That is naturally intertwined with stories about loss and constantly having to overcome it, culminating in the past year being dubbed the Year of Shadow by Sega, events and games dedicated to reintroducing the world back to the Black Hedgehog and all of his messy glory before this big movie's release. Within the confines of the movie and SA2, addressing the full scope of his trauma and guilt regarding the entire situation is the only way that he finds himself free. Having to re-remember the worst part of our lives is difficult, let alone having to do it while being cryogenically frozen for a half century. His anger in failing to save Maria, in addition to failing to be her cure in the games, fuels him to nearly the point of almost no return. And again, the last person left after the carnage who he truly cared about, brainwashing and altering his memories. Shadow is virtually refused any other option but revenge once he's back in the land of the living. In the movie, only after seeing Sonic hold back on fully committing to that path of vengeance is where Shadow realizes that there could be another way to carry on Maria's legacy. He recognizes that Maria's legacy is one that allows him to be able to control his own life on his terms, a form of self-determination. I know Maria is a kid at this point, but I don't think it's unsurprising to think that maybe Maria thinks that Shadow could be potentially used for purposes beyond curing her. So I've been waiting to talk about this right here. Beyond the absolute cool factor that was the Super Sonic, Super Shadow fight. At that point in the movie, I didn't even say nothing. I was just watching it. I just was enjoying the fucking movie. I've always appreciated the iconography of Shadow just being given a super form. He doesn't even look that much different, like he's just gold now, but seeing him turn super was so hype, like back then. People gave him literally free aura and just said that he was hyper, and like that's a completely other separate form that like has only been done by Sonic, but it just looks so cool that I really do think that Shadow super form plays into just a lot more of his themes and his growth than like literally every other character. You know, I think it's even just down to his name, really. The lore behind that is Maria is the one that names him, not Gerald. Her reasoning being that in the absence of light is darkness, but a shadow within that darkness will always reveal the direction towards the next light source. So here he is now, in his own super form alongside Sonic. He's damn near the light source now. The turnaround from doing everything that he could to blow up the world to now fighting for his life to save it, it's just peak cinema. Like, come on, man. Shadow's super transformation to this day remains to be one of the most thematic in the entire series, if not for representing the weight of what he thought to be his purpose finally being alleviated off his shoulders. To embody a shadow doesn't mean to cast darkness on others, but to liberate the people you meet by showing them that light can appear in the darkest, smallest pockets. Shadow can determine his own destiny, and that destiny can still save lives even if it couldn't save Maria. Humanity is not without its numerous faults, but it also exemplifies perseverance in a lot of ways through struggle and just facing a lot of trauma head on. Yeah, we can backslide, of course, it happens, but we all know that growth isn't linear, right? Living and learning, and then living again and learning again. I really cooked there. Towards the end, Shadow in both stories seemingly dies in epic fashion to save everyone. The movie's deviations are again pretty interesting. Movie Eggman, realizing that movie Gerald's true intentions were not great, goes arguably a bit further than the games to thwart the plot. He actually ends up killing his grandfather, on top of figuratively killing him with stopping the Eclipse Cannon from killing everyone else. Probably the one moment I bust out laughing in the theater. Still pisses on the moon though, we gotta appreciate that they did that. I am really hoping that the next movie has the moon like still destroyed just as a result of the Eclipse Cannon, just for the sake of continuity. They don't have to, but I would really appreciate it. But yeah, Eggman is also a part of the sacrifice for the world that he wanted to rule over, leaving his legacy, or at least passing on his will, to the hands of Agent Stone, the best character in these movies, hands down. It's a bombastic end to a bombastic character, though I can still see him coming back for the next one. I don't know how they'll do it, but I don't know, man. Them Sonic checks might bring Jim Carrey back for a fourth movie. I can't lie though, the game version of the ending really sticks out for me, at least for Eggman. In an extremely rare moment of brevity, he opens up to Tails about having his aspirations of being a great scientist like his grandfather since his childhood. It visibly seems to crush him that Gerald would want to destroy the same world that his grandson was a part of. This scene gets some flack, mostly due to the English dub, for Tails' response, which can be chalked up to, yeah, that was wild, ball up top. I don't know, it never really bothered me, for real. It would make sense that a kid without the same amount of life experience has only the most basic of acknowledgement to give to Eggman at this moment. Yeah, we really did it though, like, you know what I mean? We stopped it from happening. That should be something worth celebrating. Eggman receives it though, almost like he sees the kid version of himself in the fox, happy to be on the same side for once. Even if Sonic ended here with movie 3, and definitely if it ended with Adventure 2, any sacrifices made here would not be in vain. The lessons that these characters learn about the bonds they share with each other and the dangers of being blinded by revenge are still intact, even with the promise of new adventures on the horizon. Again, my bias to the game, evident here. I'm not gonna act like it's not, because that final scene really did a good job honing on everybody's initial reactions to Shadow's supposed death. And it also just did a good job of just giving them all a moment to kind of contemplate what was next, contemplate everything that had just happened. But I think the movie's great too, centering on the importance of family and being able to hold each other up with that. Tails and Knuckles, shout out to them. They are actually really involved in this final fight, literally preventing Sonic from crash landing into the planet. That is just, I love that. I love that so much. Knuckles actually initially trying to keep Sonic from going off to kill Shadow for what he did to Tom, and then later backing down because he wanted to leave space open for reconciliation just because of how much he cared about Sonic, who is pretty much his brother at this point. Like, come on, man. That is really refreshing to see just from like these characters, and just like to see that like in a kids movie. It's just cool. I'm glad the kids got that, for real. I'm glad I got that. There's still so much here I can mention, like the widely accepted as canon, but not really canon, theory that Gerald based Shadow's design off the supersonic mural on Angel Island, or that one point within the final boss of the game where Shadow refers to Sonic as the true ultimate life form, or how Knuckles and Rouge is the best ship, and anyone responsible at Sega for not letting that relationship flourish is straight up a coward. But at that point, it'd be a video about SA2 and Sonic lore, and you know, that I really wanted to not make this video that. I kind of just wanted to make it more just kind of me giving my thoughts and, you know, overall reactions to the movie's way of telling the story. I had a really good time with the film, and if y'all are free to, y'all should definitely go see it. Then inundate yourselves with as many Sonic games as you can. Probably that new recent Generations game that's like the most accessible right now as far as world building is concerned. That way, I have much more of an excuse to proselytize to all of you about the good and totally not messy world of Sonic the Hedgehog. If you enjoyed this video, y'all know what to do. Like, subscribe, share with your homies. I appreciate you. If you made it all the way, comment down below if there's any particular opinions or thoughts you want to have. If you want to have a larger discussion just about Shadow in particular, let's do it. I'm totally open. This video is definitely coming out somewhere around the end of this year, beginning of the new year. So if I don't see you before then, Happy New Year. Let's make 2025 a better year than 2024. I think that's something that's not unreasonable to ask for, right?